Friends, welcome to this episode of Being and Making Disciples. I am interviewing Andy Hickman, who is the founder of the Art of Workflow. This is a really fascinating conversation for me. And what I realized is for those of you who are only listening, you're going to miss out on some great visuals. So we are uploading this to YouTube. In case you want to see some of the things we talk about, you can check it out there. The other thing is we got so much into the theory and the kind of the big ideas behind holiness and productivity and how to order our life that I think we didn't spend enough time actually talking about the way Andy helps people become more productive in an authentically Catholic way. So we're going to have him back for another episode so he can walk me through how he would help somebody with that process. So stay tuned for that, and I know you are going to enjoy this episode. Friends, welcome back to another episode of Being and Making Disciples. I'm very excited to have with us here today Andy Hickman, who is the founder of the Art of Workflow, which is a high-touch coaching practice that empowers Catholic married couples, business owners, and creators to regenerate their clarity and creativity. So, Andy, I understand you first fell in love with sensing and articulating the structures behind ideas and behavior when studying philosophy at the College of William and Mary, and you're deeply passionate about the art of teaching. You spent your entire career in education. After directing the Institute of Catholic Culture, you founded the Art of Workflow, where you teach an organic behavioral system for managing your time, to-dos, and knowledge across all areas of your life. You've been interviewed by the David Allen Company for your research on the connections between Aquinas' psychological analysis of voluntary action and the Getting Things Done methodology. And you've been invited to speak to the Congressional Catholic Staff Association, the Fellowship of Catholic University Students, or FOCUS, Sacred Heart Radio, and numerous Catholic podcasts. You're the author of The Art of Workflow Story, the world's first comprehensive email-based book that explains the practical nuts and bolts of attention, flow, and organization in an easy-to-read format, perfect for people with busy lives. You live in Front Royal, Virginia, and you've got a wife, Liz, and 3 daughters, and we may have time to talk about that later. So, Andy,
Nice.
Thanks so much for coming on the show. It's good to be here with you.
Hey, man, Dan, I super appreciate it. And yeah, leading up to this recording, we had a short conversation, and it was so apparent in that conversation that, the Holy Spirit is totally guiding you. And I feel very happy and honored to have a conversation with you right now.
That means a lot. That's about as good a compliment as I could ever hope to receive, that the Holy Spirit's guiding me. So I hope that I can stay in that way the rest of my life. Friends, I was so excited when I spoke with Andy, when he reached out, and then we had a conversation first to talk about this, because I think this is the kind of thing that will change every aspect of your life, can change every aspect of your life, because it's such a big idea about what it means to be human. Like, we're not just talking about how to be productive and how to get more done. We're talking about who God made us to be, what God made us for. And of course, that touches on discipleship and evangelization. But it also touches on a relationship with the Lord and how we see ourselves.
Yeah.
And so this is going to be a conversation about a lot of things, but holiness, the dignity of work and labor, and how we can kind of understand ourselves in this, the role of being created to work and to glorify God, but not thinking that we have to earn his love and earn his approval. And then we'll close out with a conversation about how this can help us to evangelize better. So to start with, Andy, I just want to talk about holiness, because that's the goal. And I'll just state this now. Let's reflect on what we mean by holiness. So I invite, if you're listening, I invite you to think about that. Who do you picture, or what do you picture? And is that, what's the positive or negative emotion attached to that idea? Is that exciting to you? Is it boring? Is it satisfying? And if it's anything other than like riveting and thrilling, then I would wager to say God wants to expand our idea of that word and that concept, because to be holy is to experience all of the love and power and life of the Trinity that you are capable of. Do you agree with that, Andy?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
So one of I think the problems that we have to start with is contending with models for holiness that aren't actually Catholic and they're not biblical. Um, I know from our first conversation, you shared kind of dealing with inadequate models of holiness as a younger person and how that led to struggles. What were some of those models, and how do you think they're inadequate for us today?
Mm. Um, yeah, this is great. So a couple thoughts. One is, let's also toss in, you're saying if someone is painting an image in their mind of holiness and that image is not exciting, then they've got holiness incorrect. Let's also maybe flip that from another direction of how about paint the picture of pious, a pious life, piety, or a devout person. And if that is not riveting, then you've got piety wrong, and you've got devotion wrong.
Man, that's
right?
even more challenging, because those words for me,
Right.
at least for me, I mean, those words are like tied with, like, the first thing comes
Old
to mind.
woman,
Yep. I mean,
the old lady 6 pews back that
yep.
is always there. Yeah,
Yep.
no, I
Yep.
got the same lady in my mind.
Yeah.
We used to growing up, we used to drive this elderly lady to mass, and then the situation got where we couldn't drive her, and she got mad at us, and she said at this one time, she said, "I pray to God against you." And we would always use this line growing up amongst the siblings, like, "I'm going to pray to God against you." Yeah, but yeah, exactly. We got to reclaim all these words: holiness, piety, devotion, humility. Here's another one, right? What's your image of humility? This bubbled up when I heard you say the word holiness. Is like, what's like a very popular genre of thought that we all like? We all want to be whole.
Mm-hmm.
And so there's lots of different movements about let's be more whole people. Maybe that's a nice image. It sounds the same. When you are living a holy life, holiness, what is that all about? It's all about returning to a state of integrity, a state of wholeness, which begs the questions like, what was the original plan for all of us, right? And the original plan is usually a lot more robust and a lot more integrated than models that we have. So to answer your question, what were some models that I had growing up that were confusing? I actually, you know what? I took some pictures of recent examples that I'll share, and
Sure.
the models that for me were primarily around vocations. So I'll say this: two big themes that are in conversation, just everyday conversations about vocations. Vocation means self-annihilation, like heroic, sacrificial self-annihilation. Give everything up and follow me. And it means religious life. I'm not saying this is what it actually means.
Oh, yeah, yeah. But those are
Yeah.
the kind of almost like I like the idea of a social script. Like, the society kind of has an accepted narrative of, if you are X, that's what you do. And so if you're holy, that's what you do. You join religious life, you become a priest, or self-annihilation.
Yep. Yeah, exactly. So here are some typical examples. These are I just walked around a church, took some pictures. And these are like vocation promoting posters. Okay.
Gotcha.
Okay. So let's just take these one at a time. I'm just kind of messing around with this thing. Okay.
Sure.
Family, the foundation for vocations. What's the image that we're being presented here about what a vocation is?
Priesthood and
It's
religious life.
right. And so family has value so long as it produces a vocation to the priesthood or the religious life. Okay.
Yeah.
Let's take another one. Young people, have you ever thought of committing your existence totally to Christ? Do you think there can be anything greater than to bring Jesus to people and people to Jesus? This is a quote from St. John Paul II. Obviously true. Obviously good. We all want to be totally committed to Christ. How do we do this? Consider the priesthood.
Right. So just to be clear, we're not saying that we disagree with that quote from John Paul II.
Correct.
What we're saying is the juxtaposition of the ideas here of like, do you want to be, have you ever thought of being completely committed? Well, this is how you do that. Okay, go on.
Correct. Yeah, correct. And it's obviously not, this is, I'm assuming we're all on the same page about the importance of religion, of vocations to the religious life or to the priesthood. Like, obviously, this is super important. Okay. Yeah. But it also is a reality that the majority of humans that God has created have a different vocation. And that is typically going to be the lay vocation. And we have to understand that that is a positive vocation in and of itself. It's not like the second class, like you didn't make this team, so you got to be on that team kind of thing. So that's all we're trying to emphasize here. Just one last one. Trust in Jesus. Why are you terrified, O you of little faith? Then he got up, rebuked the winds and the sea, and there was calm. Wondering about your vocation in these stormy times, fix your eyes on Jesus. Be not afraid. So what is someone who sees this when they walk away? What are they supposed to be thinking? Are they supposed to gather from this that to the extent I do something, like should I be looking for places in which I am at unrest?
Right.
And should it be entering into that? And if I don't enter into those things that create unrest in me, is that because I don't trust Jesus? Right. So I'm just saying these are typical images. So typical image that we have. I'm going to stop sharing my screen. Is being holy means becoming a priest or becoming a religious sister. It also means going through this like extreme like self-sacrifice annihilation. Like the guiding light almost is like trust through a sensation of fear or anxiety rather than peace.
Yeah.
Through a state or an experience of authenticity. So so for me, these were some models of like, so then what does that mean? Like, if all that's true, then like how I do my day-to-day stuff around the house, like that doesn't really relate to my relationship with God. And then also like, what am I supposed to do with, am I supposed to just interpret all desires as like negative things and then based on, it's just, I guess if I were to summarize it all, there's primarily like almost like we're presenting the path of holiness around like almost like what it is not rather than what it is.
Yeah.
Right.
Go ahead.
And I just, what it is, we believe that there is a God who loves us as a father and wants us to participate with him in his life and wants us to live the most full and authentic and joyous life that is possible. And that is holiness. And so then there's a whole bunch of side conversations around that. But that is a very twisty, windy answer to your opening question, Dan.
There we go. So we'll let's recap that a little bit. And I really like the way you phrased that, and that it's holiness is living according to God's plan to experience his love, to have a complete life now, and then to enjoy him completely eternally in the next life, that is. And it's not a set of behaviors. And I think that, going back to the idea of piety, and the idea of devotion, we
Mm.
often conflate holiness, piety, and devotion with a set of behaviors. You pray a certain amount, you look a certain way, you act a certain way. There's these outward expressions of holiness that
Hmm.
are not always reflective of an internal state. Um, and I'm going to transition a little bit here to the idea of the good life. So when um, the idea of the three transcendentals have been a part of Catholic intellectual thinking for 2,000 years, and what we mean by those are truth, beauty, and goodness, and we believe those are all attributes of God, and they're ways to encounter and experience God in the world. So there's a inherent attraction of truth. And that's why so many people can think their way into the church or can be drawn into the church because of truth, because they're attracted by the integrity of church teaching and the integrity of Jesus and who he is, and the integrity of the way God created the world. And that resonates with us. And then beauty as well is this calling to our depths of who God is. And we know we're made for more. We're made for royal
Hmm.
glory. And not just concrete walls, prison cells, that kind of thing. Goodness is actually, I would wager, the most confused or the least well understood of those, because we know what beauty is, we know what truth is. Goodness, on the other hand, you're like, well, what is goodness? It's like, well, it's, I guess, being nice to somebody. And what goodness means, or what we say when we talk about the good life, is living in accord with your nature. And this goes back to what you said. I mean, God created
Yeah.
us to share and participate in his inner life. And we do that by, you could say, following a set of, by developing the virtues. That's really what it is. That's how St. Thomas would explain it. That the good
Hmm.
life is accomplished in living the virtues, and what that means is you develop these habits of soul that dispose you to justice, to giving and rendering unto everyone what they are due,
Hmm.
to charity, to loving everybody accordingly. What, based on your relationship to them and their vocation, and your vocation, and their state in life. And this is what leads to happiness. And um, it's not that you're going to be happy if you do X, but it's in being charitable, in being chaste, in being just, in being courageous, that you're happy. And that's an experience of God, because he's so perfectly ordered in that way. And St. Paul would say that the perfect culmination of all of that is the virtue of love, or charity, kind of more properly understood, not just giving alms, but loving
Hmm.
everyone as they should be doing. It's the excitement, the allure, the drama, the adventure of love in this life, loving God and loving neighbor. That's what holiness is. And um, I think that's why it's so hard to capture saints in film, because we're trying to look at piety and these objective actions, and it ends up being boring. If I'm honest, with most of the depictions of holiness I've ever seen, they're just simply boring, and they don't capture what sainthood really is, and what deep love of God really is. Um,
I think we can push that a little bit and say, not only are they boring, but sometimes they can be inhumane,
yeah, I agree with that.
right? Um, yeah. Keep going.
Okay, so um, I'll loop back around here, to that you brought up. Actually, I'll segue. I had a very similar understanding of holiness, I think, to you, and that when I was convinced that I wanted to give my life to God after I had this beautiful conversion experience where I knew that Jesus was real and wanted a relationship with me,
Yeah.
and I dedicated myself to him. I prayed a lot, I read a lot, I studied a lot. I tried to live a good life.
Yeah.
And one of the things I thought was, if I'm going to be a saint, which I was convinced I wanted to do at 16 and 17 years old, was I should be a priest. And so I thought very seriously about that. And I realized this later. That was my default understanding of a vocation. So, as you were pointing out with those images, which were, graphically, they were very well done, like great
Yep.
design on those flyers.
Totally.
Um, but it was were they true? And the understanding that a vocation is only to the priesthood or only to the religious life led me to assume that I had that vocation because I wanted to be holy. And so I was dating my wife, and then I broke up with her. And in hindsight, it's one of the most foolish things I ever did, because it broke her heart. And I had to wait 2 years before she was willing to date me again. And thanks be to God, she
Yep.
was willing to do that. But I never asked the question, Jesus, do you want me to get married? Until I was actually at a seminary visiting for a weekend, and I was in adoration, and I thought, well, let me just ask this question. And I asked in prayer, Jesus, do you want me to get married? And I expected the answer to be no. I expected God to say no, which is why I'm so convinced that when I perceived, or I kind of sensed God was saying, yes, get married, that wasn't the answer I wanted to hear, which is why I know it was from him and not just me coming up with my own thing there. So several years later, or really more like 15 years later, I was approached by someone and asked to consider the permanent diaconate. And I was attracted to it at first, but then after further reflection, I realized what I'm attracted to is is a life of being a disciple of Jesus. I'm
Mm-hmm.
attracted to telling people who he is and helping people experience his love. And
Mm-hmm.
that's what I'm drawn to. I'm drawn to that adventure. And I was conflating the life of discipleship with the life of a priest or deacon. And those aren't the same thing. And I want everyone to know that. Like, everyone's called to be a disciple,
Yeah.
even if they're not called to be a priest or a deacon. And there's more than enough excitement in being a disciple for one lifetime for anybody. They don't
Right.
need to go look for anything else. Um, so now I'll go back to, you talked about, what about those little things in life? Like um,
Yeah.
if holiness, a poor understanding of holiness is that we're in this constant state of tension and conflict, and it's just this subjugation of the will as we kind of drag ourselves through this formation and discernment process. If that's not it, then what is? I would say it's allowing every aspect of life to be a gift back to God in gratitude for who he is and what he's done for us. And then holiness isn't just in huge acts that everyone can see. It's not blowing a trumpet on the street corner, which Jesus clearly condemns. It's the small things. It's the widow's mite. It's giving from our resources in a way that hurts, that nobody might ever know. Or it's finding ways to let the interaction with your children be an experience of God's love for them, or with your spouse, or with your neighbor. And then all of a sudden, when that's the model, everything matters. And not in the sense of you have to be preoccupied with all of it, but everything becomes the matter to make beauty out of and to make goodness out of.
Mm.
And your whole life can become a masterpiece for God, from your rising to your sleeping. I don't know. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I completely agree. I think what is like the core of all of this? It is, like you said, it is love. But what's love? Love is there's different definitions, but let's just say it's a union between two persons. That, okay, all the other things, a good union and blah, 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 okay, fine. But it's like person.
Mm-hmm.
So it doesn't, anything else around the conversation of love derives its value from the fact that there are people involved. So like when we talk about, I want to do, there aren't holy things. Like, it's not like there's holy things out there for us to do.
Mm-hmm.
There are actions that can be done by holy people. And so part of this has to be like, who exactly are we? Who exactly is God? And then everything else flows from that, because I feel like sometimes it's almost some of my background is in philosophy, so some of the images I use are coming from that circle. But a very common one that most people are familiar with is Plato's cave.
Mm-hmm.
Of he describes basically like truth, like experiencing truth is like this path of walking away from these layers between us and what is really there. And so he describes this person thinking that he sees these shadows on the wall and he thinks that they're the real thing, and then he realizes, oh, they're shadows. So he goes into another room of this cave and eventually gets out of this cave and he looks up at the sun. It's, in one sense, like yes, there's so much truth in that analogy of the Plato's of the cave, but also I think there's an opportunity for us to view it almost in the exact opposite way, in the sense of we're like not taking reality at face value, and so we're like, if we were taking reality at face value, we would be in a constant state of amazement and wonder.
Yeah.
What in the world is going on? There is there's another person out there that's walking down the street, like, there's a whole world inside that person. And then what's this? Like, what's this thing we call a body? And all of these things are right there in front of our nose, and they're telling us about God. And we often complicate it by putting in these layers of and sometimes language will confuse us. So it's like, we can talk about the relationship between like work and prayer, right? Often people put these things against each other, and they like, the day could end and then someone could be like, hey, did you pray today? And they would say, no, I didn't find time to pray. And then you could ask them, did you work today? Oh, yes, I worked. You didn't do either then. Like, if you worked and you didn't pray, right? If you worked and you didn't pray, then you weren't really working.
What were you doing then?
You were going through the motions without realizing the incredible significance of your actions. Because all of our actions are supposed to be, we've got the crazy responsibility of, God is our Father, and he's not the kind of father that's like, hey, idiot, stay back there, I got this taken care of, right?
Right.
There's commonly, everyone's going to think I'm crazy and bashing things that I'm not actually bashing, but like a common image of like sainthood or holiness is like, I'm the paintbrush in the master's hands. Like, I'm just the tool, he's the artist.
Right.
Like, yes, there's truth to that, but also, like, would a father speak that way about his son? Like, you're just the tool. You know what I mean? Like, no, like,
yeah, he wouldn't.
he's the kind of father that's like, come on, you turn 16 or 15, like, you got to get your driver's permit. You're not just going to sit in the passenger seat the whole time. Like, go start doing some stuff. And he wants to hear about it, and he's excited about it, right? So I don't know how I got onto that, but the point is, all of our action is intended to be holy action, because action itself is holiness, is holy, when we go back to the very beginning of all this. So
in the context of that relationship, like the union of two persons, one person willing the good of the other, it sounds like that's where all actions become significant, and that you can do a good thing for a bad reason, and that act, the thing you did, is no longer good. You can give money for the sake of being noticed by others. Now your act is not good, even though it's good that somebody in need might have money. I mean, and Jesus addresses this specifically in Scripture. To pause for a second, I think what you just described is the mentality of the older son in the parable of the prodigal son. He says to his father, like, I've done everything you've ever told me to do. That's the paintbrush in the artist's hand. Like, he didn't recognize the freedom the father had given him as a son, as an heir. he was a servant, like in his own father's house, and he didn't even realize it. And sorry, I know I'm dancing around a little bit, but going
No,
back to
that's
the
right.
idea that you don't give so that people notice you. You give because God is generous and gives, and He invites us to emulate Him and to do that too.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and because people need it, and so that act of giving is, you could say, ratified or made beautiful, made holy in the context of a relationship done for the good of another, with the right reason, in the right kind of like in the right setting. You're not giving away money that your family needs for food, that kind of thing. um, so
I wonder if it would be more accurate to just slightly adjust this and say,
sure.
by like, it does not become good. Like all of these actions like are good by default, and then we corrupt them
Yeah,
to the extent that we are not living in alignment with the order that God has established.
I like that better. Yeah, there's things that are in accord with our nature, and if we live in accord with that nature, then those things are good. And to the extent that we do that, that's a good life. And when we don't, that's a disordered life. Um,
Yeah.
Now, go ahead.
Well, I just think it's connected to the themes that you're leading us through, because there's a holy priest that I know, and I think he was quoting somebody else, but like we often are like we have this like almost like reactive or like inverted view of a lot of things. So like when we get to, let's look at the sacraments, like
Mhm.
what's happening there? Like when we're looking at communion, what's happening is God, like his original plan was thwarted around creation, and then okay, so we fall and he has to come redeem us, and in order to redeem us, he's like applying these almost like band-aids, like these to try to like staple things back together or something.
Right.
A phrase here is that in communion, wheat or bread returns to what it was always meant to be, and wine returns to what it was always meant to be, which is a medium for God to share his life with us. And I feel like that plays out over a bunch of different things. Like it's not like we, because of some special thing, we can like sanctify work. Like work is already sanctified. Then we lost that sanctity.
Yeah, yeah.
And then when we sanctify work, it's not like we figured out this way to make this bad thing good. It's like we're coming back and we're recognizing its innate goodness from the beginning by God's grace.
Yeah, that's a much better way of stating it than what I said. And I think that just shows how easy it is to kind of to accept a negative mindset of things. It's like, oh, well, this isn't good by default, I have to make it good. It's like, no, the Lord made this thing good.
Right.
And he invites us to participate with him in that. Um, and that's a much healthier way of looking at, I mean, really everything in life.
Yeah, I think it relates to what you were talking about around like discipleship, like um or let's say evangelization. Like, okay, if we have it backwards around what work is and what activity is, then we're going to also have evangelization backwards. So like if we just go like back. We were chatting about this before we kind of like hit live or whatever. For whatever reason, there's usually this misunderstanding of like the narrative in Genesis where it's like, okay, Adam and Eve fall,
Mm-hmm.
and the effects of this are being articulated by God, and we walk away. I was just reading This is a great book, by the way. The Art of Living is by Dietrich and Alice von Hildebrand.
Oh, cool.
But there's a thing in here which I think is what most people think if they don't check it. She's just talking about a bunch of different stuff, but then here's this line. Alas, we are far from remembering that work was meant to be a punishment inflicted upon Adam after original sin. And there's not like crucial context I'm like blocking out of here, but this tends to be, from my experience, what the average Catholic, at least in the circles that I've traveled in my life or whatever, thinks about work, that it is a punishment. It's like a necessary evil or something like that. And we want to just remember this is not the tradition of the church. Like the tradition is much different. I had wanted to share just one quick quote on this because I think it's very important and relates to evangelization.
Sure.
Two things. So the different popes have written different encyclicals on this theme of work. And some of them are coming out of trying to course correct the tainting of work that resulted from the rise of communism, where we had a very ugly image of work and a very unintegrated one. But two important documents. One was Rerum Novarum from Leo the 13th in 1891. And he says something very important in paragraph 17. He says, as regards bodily labor, even had man never fallen from the state of innocence, so even if the fall had never occurred, he would not have remained wholly idle. But that which would then have been his free choice and his delight, that is work, became afterwards compulsory and the painful expiation for his disobedience. So what Pope Leo the 13th is saying there is that work is, if the fall never happened, it's not like man would have never worked. Of course we would have worked, because we're made in the image of the Creator and he wants us to participate in his creation. But then later on, Pope St. John Paul II, I think, puts it very clearly in 1981 in Laborem Exercens, where he talks about Genesis being the quote, first gospel of work. But he says in paragraphs 4 and 9, he says, the church is convinced that work is a fundamental dimension of man's existence. And then jumping over to paragraph 9, he says, it is not only good, that is work, it's not only good in the sense that it is useful or something to enjoy, it is also good as being something worthy. That is to say, something that corresponds to man's dignity, that expresses this dignity and increases it. So how does this relate to evangelization? Well, wait, if we're starting back over and we're like shaking the etch and sketch, clean slate, and now we're back and we're like, okay, wait, work is actually a really good thing. It's hard because we're in a fallen state, but itself is good. Okay, then actually, like, should I really be pinning action against something like contemplation? When I am doing activities, am I hitting a spiritual pause button? Like, I mean, I could, but like, is that automatically what has to happen? Or is God also calling me to be with him in those moments as well? Because St. Paul tells us we need to pray always. This relates to evangelization because many lay Catholics are kind of walking around without fully realizing it. And it's not a judgment. It's just reality. There's certain layers of beliefs like that if they were, a light was shined on them, they would be seen as, I am maybe a second-class citizen when it comes to evangelization. I am, to the extent that I live a more contemplative life, whatever that means, I am being more holy or I'm growing closer to God. And so therefore, why would the average layperson like get out of the house and go to the next door neighbor's door and knock on it and say, hey, do you want to come over for a 4th of July barbecue? The 4th of July barbecue is not viewed as a holy thing because it's just this weird secular thing. And food is just this weird secular thing that we just like have to do in order to not die. I'm not an evangelizer because I didn't find my vocation. And I'm not like, by going over and having this conversation, I'm taking away from time in which I could be sitting in my room and studying the Bible.
Mm-hmm.
And then it just results in kind of like not a very mobile evangelical, like, I don't know, workforce is the wrong word, but I think you know what I mean.
Oh yeah, absolutely. It's the workforce hasn't been mobilized. We're just sitting around doing nothing. In the past on this podcast, I've used this image of the church, and that we're told, I mean, even explicitly at the end of the liturgy, go and make disciples, go announce the gospel, go and proclaim the good news. And yet I think most Catholics would agree we don't. And we haven't been given the tools, we haven't been given the training. And we're like troops who are in barracks, let's say on some outpost way up in the middle of nowhere, and we've been told for a long time, hey, there's going to be a battle, hey, you're gonna need to go out and fight. And I don't necessarily want to go too much to like a violent idea of sharing the faith, but just we're equipped, we're soldiers for the Lord. But if you only ever stay in those barracks and you never go out, and you never get to put to use what you've been trained to do, what's going to happen eventually? You're going to mutiny. You're going to turn on the people inside of those barracks and start arguing with them about everything from the color of the walls to the clothes they're wearing to the way they train for battle. And we have all of these pretend crises within the church that I think stem from we're not doing our job. Like if we were all busy evangelizing, a lot of us wouldn't have time to nitpick little things like that are either don't fall within the responsibility the Lord has asked us to take care of, or don't matter anyway. I mean, our vocation is simply to make disciples. Often, I mean, that's not the only thing, but our vocation is to make disciples. That's why the church exists. And if we're not doing that, I think we're just we can't help but get into trouble because we're ignoring our responsibility.
Yeah. And we've also said in this conversation that our vocation is to love and be loved. And so we're making disciples because we're only trying to facilitate people being able to better love and be loved.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
So I think we could keep going down this road for a long time because it's fun. But I do want to turn specifically to more to workflow and how we can understand kind of the idea of productivity and ordering our day as a way of like living this whole life and living as God intended us to. So could you give us an overview of what you mean by workflow and why we should care about it?
Yes, absolutely. I'm just going to get one thing on my end, which will be relevant to this.
Sure.
Okay, so workflow. Well, I guess a couple of things. There's also the word art in here, but workflow is simply the ordering of work. Okay. So we have a couple different things that need to be explained, like what's work. So we're not talking about job. Like job includes work, but work is a bigger umbrella. We're just talking about any kind of activity. Okay. And then when we say the ordering of it, we mean bringing it into alignment with what it's supposed to be and kind of orchestrating and harmonizing the various components. So when something is ordered, ease is experienced and excellence is experienced. So when we talk about workflow, we're like, okay, there's a way in which we can orchestrate the various activities in our lives, whether that is having an idea in the middle of a shower, whether that is trying to work on a project and then a phone call is coming through, or it's trying to gather your thoughts before you present at a meeting, whatever. All of these are instances of work. And there's a way in which we can order it so that these types of activities are able to be done with greater ease and with greater clarity. And the way that is done is through mastering an art of it. So we can talk about, when we say that there is an art to something, we mean that there are certain fixed universal principles or behaviors that, when they are done, create excellence. So we say that there's an art to speak, there's an art to listening, or there's an art to how you play piano. This means that it doesn't matter like what culture you're from or what personality you have, or okay, there's excellence. So we teach the art of workflow. So there are 4 cognitive behaviors that help people live more intentional and clear and rich lives, both inside and outside their job. And that's what we call the art of workflow.
And you're saying that these principles are universal. So these principles are true for you, for me, for my wife, for your wife, for our kids, and for the people we don't know who are living on the other side of the globe from us.
Yes, this is correct. So, and this is because this is built off of essential elements in the way that humans think. Okay. So, outside of this chat, we've talked about one of the reference points for this for a Catholic is, you don't have to be a Catholic, is Aquinas's analysis of voluntary action. So what happens in the mind? So St. Thomas Aquinas, around 13th century, by the way, is pulling from Aristotle. So this really goes back to ancient times, has an analysis of what happens in a human when a human decides to act. So you could kind of think of this as like, if you're like on a basketball team or something, and then the game is recorded, and then practice after that game looks like reviewing the game footage. And sometimes the coach would like slow down the game footage and put it in slow-mo. That chart that you were just displaying is a graphical representation of what Aquinas says, and it's as if it was the slow-mo replay of human action. So when we are doing things, what's happening? Well, he describes whenever we act, so 2 powers of what's called the soul is the intellect and the will. So we kind of always know that, like everyone's kind of like, what makes us humans is like we have the ability to reason, we have the ability to make choices. And so this comes back to the intellect and the will. Well, the intellect and the will, according to this analysis, have 6 distinct acts that they do. And so that chart that you're seeing there is just a display of what these acts are. And so we can make distinctions here, and we can draw out lessons. So one is like, when you look at this, you see an alternating between acts of the intellect and acts of the will. And one takeaway is like, look, we have to not subtly slip into a like Gnostic self view. It's like we're just this like disembodied soul that is just like trapped inside a body, and just approach everything from this heady intellectual fashion. The will has to be engaged in order for action to really occur. And so you see this blending and this dancing back and forth between the intellect and the will. But there's also different points in here that we commonly see people get bottlenecked in. when they get frustrated with their work, or they start to get overwhelmed. So just to take one example, because I don't want to get too much into the weeds, but at the top of that chart, you saw the word apprehension. So according to Aquinas, the first act is of on the intellect's part, and it is the perceiving of a thing, and basically recognizing that it is good. Okay. Once something is perceived as good, it can be desired, which is that act of volition.
Okay.
Okay. Once it is desired, we can make an intellectual judgment of like, well, like, is it possible or not? That's the judgment of attainability. And then there's still the will then needs to be like, well, it is possible, and I'm going to figure out how to make it possible. That's the active intention. Okay. And it kind of goes so on and so forth, but it all starts with apprehension. Yeah. So one way in which we see people bottlenecking their work is they are not seeing their work properly in two ways. In the first way, which has been the bulk of this conversation, they're not seeing their work properly in one sense because they're seeing it as a temporary, necessary evil distraction between them and God. It pauses their conversation rather than it should be a part of their conversation with them. But another way in which they're not seeing their work is that they're keeping it all in here. So a lot of us have gotten caught off guard by all the technological developments that happened in the information age. And we're like not realizing that we have like a significantly low sensorial relationship with our work. So I don't know if it was you and I earlier or someone else today, but we were talking about, think of the average experience of like a work hours. Actually, okay, yeah, there was this other gentleman. He was describing how he has a totally virtual and remote position. And there's all this like kind of like abstract problem solving. Like, so compare that to like, say, like, what if you were a farmer? You start your day, you're like, what do I need to do? Like, you would just need to go outside and see like, the tomato plants are withering. Like, I need to go water that. Like, it's right there. It's in your eyesight. Yeah. Whereas the modern knowledge worker starts his day and he's like, what do I need to do? I'm going to boot up my computer. And then all of a sudden there's like 20, 30 windows. And he's trying to like sort them and make sense, not by taking something with his hands and like moving something through like space in any significant way, but he's like stroking a glass screen, or he's tapping on these plastic keys. And then he's wondering why he feels so foggy in the head and fractured in his attention. And the way out of this is to reframe something. So when we feel overwhelmed, it's common for people to have this thought like, I am overwhelmed because I have so much to do on my mind. And they think it is a volume issue. I have so much to do on my mind. When really what's happening is they're overwhelmed because they have so much to do on their mind. It's all in here. So
for our listeners, Andy's pointing to his head. He did that earlier. So he's it's all mental.
Vigorously pointing to his head. And so like we're meant to be, we are persons. We are a soul body union. The way that we think about things shouldn't just be this invisible mental activity. Aquinas says that the principle of knowledge is in the senses.
So kind of the foundation of knowledge.
Yeah, the material cause of intellectual knowledge is in the senses. Like think the five senses.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So what we want to do is when we get overwhelmed, don't have this internal conversation, which is, oh, I just need to think about this stuff more. Have
Right.
this conversation. I need to make sense, literally, of this. So what does that look like? Talk about what's swirling around in here with someone else so that you can hear it and verbally speak it, or grab a pen and carve out your thoughts into paper. But until you do that, like your mind is not meant to be holding as much information as you are cramming it with. It's supposed to be distributed a lot more organically, both into your physical environment and integrated into your senses. And often what is resulting then is people are not even able to fully apprehend, that's a first act, what they're even trying to do. And so they get super frazzled.
So it sounds like the first bottleneck is to really just to rephrase what you said. The reason we can feel overwhelmed and frustrated, even by like, let's say 5 to-dos, we know we have 5 things to do, and more often it's probably 50, is because we're not apprehending the good. Like we haven't made sense of task number 1 or any of those tasks, in the sense that, for instance, for me, I know I need to send a thank you card, and I need to contact our dental insurance, and then I need to send some videos to people. And in my mind, those are, I think, like, oh, I have to get that done, but I haven't actually connected the action of writing a thank you card to the good of that. So I haven't apprehended it yet. Am I capturing it correctly?
Yes. And the reason why you haven't apprehended it is you haven't given your mind the space to engage in that activity of apprehending it. So you are caught in a cycle of thinking of all these open loops in your life rather than thinking about them.
That is 100% true for me. I don't know, for folks listening or watching, I don't know if that describes you. That describes me 100%. And that I'll flit from one thing to the next, like a little bird, going from this branch to that branch, to that branch, to that branch. And I never settle on any of them long enough to ever get anything done. And the attention residue of, oh, thank you card. Where are my thank you cards? Oh, they're in my room. Oh, my room is dirty. I better put this laundry away. And like, I never just stop and say, okay, let me like think through the sequence of tasks that needs to happen and why I'm doing this. And so they all stay. I think you use the expression, something more or less like, put that down on paper, like incarnate it on paper, in a sense, like be able to visualize this thing you have to do, even something as simple as a list, so that you can see this is a thing now. It's not just an idea. Like writing a thank you letter is an action that has a reason, and even just visualizing it is going to do something different for me.
Yes, we believe in the word made flesh, not just the word.
Mm-hmm.
And so we of all people, we should be familiar with the significance of the written word, and that it is not just for people who have like a novel in their head. It's like it is a way for you to, we're using this term literally, make sense of things in your life. And it's only when you support the act of thinking with the senses that you're really able to effectively think about stuff and not just think of it. And just maybe just one real quick example. There was someone just the other day who, as we were going, okay, what's on your mind? Well, what's on his mind is personal budget, personal family budget. Okay. Why is it on your mind? Well, I have to update the family budget. Okay. So then what do you want to put on your to-do list? Well, I just have to sit down and update it. And so most people would just stop there. They just put update personal budget on their to-do list. But there's a reason why he wasn't satisfied with that. So we were asking some questions. Okay. fine. Let's say you were to sit down and update this budget. What would happen? Well, I'd pull out these things and that thing, and I have to find this document. It's on the computer. It wouldn't be that hard. But honestly, it doesn't really even matter because we've tried this budget thing a bunch of times and my wife is not really on the same page with it. Oh, so, uh, so it's not like you actually don't even have a budget system. No. And even if you did, you don't have harmony with your wife around a budgeting approach within your marriage. No. Well, then what needs to be put on that man's to-do list is start a conversation with his wife about, do they want to do budgeting or not? Right. But what happens is he puts update family budget on his to-do list and looks at that day after day after day after day and makes the wrong inference that he's not doing it because he stinks or he's lazy and whatever, when reality, that wasn't even the thing he was supposed to do.
I love that. It's so funny that you talk about the budget money. So my wife is a mental health therapist, and I've heard her talk about this topic a number of times. Any argument that lasts more than 5 minutes is about something else. And
yeah.
She says that, especially with money, like it almost doesn't make sense that there's ever an argument about money because it's math. You either have it or you don't.
Yes.
And what people are really arguing about is the meaning and the value behind money and what the kind of the emotional weight that people assign to experiences and purchases. And that's what they're disagreeing about. So someone who says, well, I really want to spend this budget money on this, what they're saying is that item, that service, that experience is more valuable to me than what we're paying for it. And so it makes sense to get it. And I value this thing more than I value that thing. And that's why I'm not using the money to get that thing.
Yes.
And that's a hard conversation to have because you're going to disagree with your spouse on that stuff. And so it's going to take sacrifice and negotiation of saying, okay, like, yeah, this is, I totally understand why that guy never did his budget, because he wasn't, when he was writing Do the Budget, it sounds, and this is so funny to say this out loud, in his mind, it was like the like, imagine you've got a rug that's covering a dragon, right? And you saw the tip of the dragon's tail poking out. And that tip of the dragon's tail was what he was writing down as prepare a budget. But the dragon underneath was a dreaded conversation that he didn't want to have. And it was, in a sense.
Yeah. And then also, like, let's say, so if someone continued that, they're like, well, then what's the hope? The hope is just to, like, pull the carpet off of this dragon. And it's like, well, how am I going to feel better when I see this big, scary, massive thing? And every single time, what was this? Someone had this phrase that the cost of ignorance is more than the cost of awareness. Okay, so fine, let's see the big scary dragon. But then also, if you look at the big scary dragon, not just from like, but well, what's the first thing for me to do? Then it doesn't become a big scary thing. And you see that the one scale that's missing in the dragon's chest, and you're able to just thrust that spear right in there. Okay. And it's not this big scary dragon that's impossible anymore.
Right. Yeah. What you don't know is far scarier than what you do, I think, at least in many cases. I'm thinking I'm very afraid of snakes. But the funny thing is, once I see the snake, it's like, okay, I can stand there and look at it, but I'm so afraid of being startled by a snake. I had an experience. I was cleaning my neighbor's porch, and he had these wicker chairs with cushions on it, right? So I go around the corner to the spot that's right by the bushes, and I pick up the cushion on this chair because I'm going to pressure wash the chair or something. And there's a snake coiled up under the cushion. Oh. And he's just as surprised to see me as I am him, right? And he's not poisonous, but he lunges at me. And I screamed. And I was like probably 17 or 18 years old. And there's no way it was a dignified scream. And I just had like, I know, like I'm gonna come across another snake like that. And so I'm afraid of that happening. And yet it's like, okay, but if it's there, so what? No big deal. Like it's not gonna get you.
Yeah.
So I'm afraid of seeing it. But once I've already seen it, okay, you can't unsee it.
Yeah.
Then you know
Okay.
what to
I see
do.
what you're saying. Yes. Yes. It's like creepy shadow or something that's like scarier than the thing that's actually creating that
Exactly.
shadow.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
You turn the light on, and it's like, oh, that was my, my lamp creating that weird shadow on the wall or something like that. It's not actually a human face on the wall. It's it's just the shadow of a lamp.
Yeah. Okay. And then just to bring this back to workflow, just real quick, is to the extent that you are keeping all the thoughts in your head and they're just swirling around, like you are always interfacing with life from the perspective of the crazy, scary shadows and not the actual objects that are creating those shadows.
Yeah,
Yet
yeah.
you have to get that conversation out of your head and into your world primarily through writing lists.
Gotcha.
And that helps a lot.
So to pause for a second, if you're watching, you saw the list of the acts of the intellect and the will that I put up. But if you're just listening and you weren't able to see that, then you can actually email Andy at artofworkflow.com, and he can send you the essay that was a part of. So Andy he wrote an essay on Aquinas, kind of the interaction between Aquinas and David Allen Company getting things done. Or not so much the interaction, but the harmony between the two.
Mm-hmm.
And so
Mm-hmm.
that was a diagram from there. And I'll link to Andy's email address in the show notes so you can email him to take a look at that. If we can, I'd like to go back to those 4 universal principles, because we introduced those and then I hijacked the conversation and didn't let you talk about them.
No, you've been so forgiving, and whoever's listening this, if you've gotten this far, you're very patient, and we're having lots of fun and going in all these different directions. I hope the what's the word? The windiness is not having you miss like the essence of what we're trying to create here.
So the 4 universal principles of the art of workflow.
Yeah. What are they?
Yeah.
Sure. Yeah. Okay. So they are. So we'll just name them. Okay. And let me also say this. We will, if you want a more detailed articulation of these 4 behaviors, we've written a story about them, and that goes through each of these 4 behaviors in more detail. And you can read that on artofworkflow.com. Okay. That now gives me breathing room because it's like, oh man, there's so many different angles about these things. Okay. So in short, these 4 behaviors are called collecting, processing, reflecting, and moving. Well, what are they? They're easiest to describe in relation to what they resolve. So we'll start in a kind of negative fashion and talk about different pain points, and then we'll just define these things. So if you've ever had the sensation of there's so much swirling in your head that you can't be present to the person that is speaking to you, or you can't think through something. And so you just like, you go, ah, and you're like, I just need to write all this down. Okay. You're doing that because you can only hold so much stuff in here at the same time that you try to think about it and make sense of it. So like, this is why every meeting room in the universe has a whiteboard in it, because then we can extend the conversation onto this thing. We can both see it. Okay, fine. So the first behavior, collecting, is twofold. It is first recognizing that you have something on your mind, because many people are walking around in a chronic state of just constantly thinking of things. Recognizing that you have something on your mind and then externalizing it in a quick, easy way so that later on you can make sense of it. Okay, so this looks like you come out of Mass on Sunday and you see the new married couple that you're like, I haven't seen them here before. So you go up and you introduce yourself to them. Hey, blah, blah, blah. Okay. And then at the end of that conversation, you're like, oh, it'd be so great to have you over sometime. Yeah. Okay, great. Now at that point, you can just like go back into the car and then go back home. And then the kids are doing their thing and you and your wife are doing your thing. And then that dinner never happens.
Mm-hmm.
Or before you get into the car, you take out your little notebook or you take out your phone or whatever, and you jot just a quick little memory saving thing that's just like Smith's dinner, host, whatever. Okay. And then you save it. That's collecting. Okay. So fine. But what if we really lean into this and we do this for all the different open loops in our life? Aren't we going to just have our phone, and then when we open up the notes app, it's just like, oh, there's like piles and piles of notes, or we're going to have the desk that's just drowning in sticky notes? What we need is we need a standardized way to clarify and organize all the little loose random things that we're collecting. And this way needs to be standardized. Otherwise, every single time we're going to have to reinvent the wheel, and it's going to seem like this really overwhelming blank canvas kind of thing. Okay. So that is a second behavior of workflow. We call it processing, and it is clarifying and organizing that which you collected. And you use a fixed set of prompts, basically, that can take any kind of stimulus that's pulling on you and bring it to a state of clarity. So now you have these lists that are clear. There's a whole conversation of what it means to be organized, which is outside the scope of this interview. But everything in life gathers dust. So everyone can start January with a really sweet, clean new planner, and then they'll still get to mid-February and the whole thing will be a mess. Mm-hmm. So thus comes into the rescue, behavior number 3, which is reflecting. So reflecting is keeping your lists fresh and functional by rhythmically re-engaging with them, not only re-engaging with them when I'm panicked and stressed out.
Yeah.
But having an order to it. There is a set cadence. And so there really are 3 specific rhythms that we teach people in, but having a rhythm to this so that I know that when I like put this list away, or at least my site, I can trust and understand when I'm going to come back to it. And that colors a whole bunch of different things. It also frees you from the slavery of perfect structure. So a lot of people, they externalize their thought once, they never return to it. Then they start sensing like, ooh, I'm starting to like forget what the stuff is. And they make the mistake of, well, I just need more structure to relieve the sensation. So they come up with their 1, 2, 3 prioritizing scheme, or they come up with all these different labels, and then they choke the life out of the thing with too much structure. If you keep a base level of familiarity with anything, you need very little structure. So your best friend comes back in town. When you guys hang out, you don't have to have an itinerary for the day. You just hang out with each other. Same thing with your to-do lists. Like if you're in if you're in regular contact with them, then you don't need all this fancy structure. Okay. Lastly, there's still the fact of, okay, I can have a clear and spacious mind. I can have lists that have concrete actions. I don't have to figure out what they mean when I look at them. They're organized well. I'm in touch with them. It's still the fact that at any given time, it can be Wednesday at 1:17 p.m. and I have to choose what in the world am I going to do at this given moment. And facilitating that choice is what the behavior of moving is all about. So moving is making effective, not perfect, action choices with ease by balancing 3 things: your intuition, your analytical thinking, and your lists. And again, you can get more details on this on our website. But that's the short of it. So we grow in self-awareness. So we're not just like replaying tapes without even realizing we're replaying them. We let them out in some kind of quick and dirty way. We come back. We use a fixed process that never changes to bring these things into a clear and organized state. We keep in touch with them so that we don't like build a second job creating all these fancy organizational systems. And then we don't forget to balance. If you're the really analytical kind of guy, you have to balance your intuition. If you're a really shoot from the hip, Wild West cowboy, intuitive guy, you need to balance yourself out with a little bit more strategic thinking, and anchor yourselves with the objectivity of your lists. And that allows you to make any random choices throughout the day with more confidence and without that sensation of like, am I forgetting something else that's more important?
That's great. So you probably could tell I was taking notes as you were going, because I'm just thinking of how to use that in my own life to create, to kind of master the art of workflow better. It seems beautifully normal. And
yes,
it's not almost, when I was reading your essay about the similarity between Aquinas and David Allen, you quoted him as kind of saying like, yeah, this is simple. Like it's obvious. But that doesn't mean people will do it.
Yep.
And it's almost the kind of thing we do so naturally when we're working well that we don't realize it. So for the expert to kind of step back and be able to analyze their own craft and be able to pull out the component parts, that's the gift that I think you have here, is helping. It's not onerous. It's not like you very clearly articulated, you could strangle yourself with too much structure, with too much going on. I mean, you're going to give yourself a second job if, like, oh, you have this elaborate filing system, or you have this elaborate like checklist system where, okay, you move this thing from that thing, and this just seems seems intuitive and natural, and like it fits.
Yes.
At least for me, and I think that's really, really good, because that just seems like it's human shaped, and it's going to fit with life for people.
Yes, this is correct. And I think part of what's in play here is that we're coming from the rich tradition of a Catholic understanding of a human, which is someone with innate intelligence. So while there's all this hype about Chat GPT and like a new software thing coming out every 2 seconds, we can make the mistake, if we're not careful, of thinking, well, the way that I'm going to bring order back into my life is out there. Right? Where clarity is an internal reality. It's not an external reality. And so, yeah, it's coming from a place of a high view of man, a high view of what God has empowered him to be able to do. And these are innate abilities. Everyone already knows how to do them. And you just have to uncover some blind spots where you're not consistently performing them, get a little bit of guidance, and then, yeah, you're off and running.
Andy, I'm just we're kind of coming too close to our time limit here, but I'm just so grateful that you have articulated this in this way, because I could just tell. I mean, I know so many people who have attempted things like this, or who have looked for things like this. You're addressing a real need in the world to help. I mean, not only is this giving people an image of holiness and a kind of an adequate anthropology of who they are, an understanding of what it means to be a human working and being in relationship. So you're giving them that identity, and then you're giving them steps to subdue the earth and fill it better. And that's really important work. So thanks, man.
Thanks, brother. I super appreciate it. Thank you.
You're welcome. Well, we'll wrap up there. I have a feeling, Andy, we might need to bring you back just to, we spent about an hour and 10 minutes talking about philosophy of what it means to be a person, and then 10 minutes talking about the art of workflow. I think I'd love to have you again and just talk I promise, folks, we will just talk about the art of workflow so that Andy can spend more time talking about that if he's
Nice. There
willing
you
to
go.
join us again. But
Absolutely.
um,
Yeah, I would love to.
okay, thank you. So I'm gonna put in the show notes your email address so people can get that article that you wrote on Aquinas and
Mhm.
the David Allen Company getting things done, and then as also a link to the story that you wrote, and that's at theartofworkflow.com.
Yeah, you know what? Could I send you, I'll put it in the chat. Um, if someone went to our website right now,
Mhm.
artofworkflow.com, they would receive the kind of like breakdown of what these behaviors are.
Sure.
But they wouldn't receive kind of like the theology woven around that. And so this link actually is kind of like a sub page on our website. That would be the best link for someone to go if they want like both the I don't even like these categories because I don't believe that they are distinct. But to use false categories, if they need like if they want the practical nuts and bolts and the theology, then that link would serve that purpose better.
Perfect. So we will add that in the show notes as well, both on YouTube and in podcasts. So, friends, I hope you enjoyed this and that this gives you a better understanding of how you can have an integrated life and view work not as a bad thing, but as a good thing that is a gift from God to participate with Him, and that evangelization is a part of that, and that uh, these universal principles that Andy recognized will help you to order your life better so that you have more of a sense of workflow and that it's natural and intuitive and it doesn't feel onerous. And
Mm.
Andy, I just want to thank you so much, man. This was a really enjoyable conversation and I'm grateful for the work you're doing. If people wanted to work with you, what would be the best way for them to do that?
The best way for that would be for them to email me. Man, I've got such mixed feelings on social media. It's like such a two-edged sword. So the more and more we do this, my wife and I have been coaching people in this for 2.5 years now. We really just like the personal relationship and let that be the foundation. And I really don't spend much time on social media. So the best way would be to email me at andy@artofworkflow.com and we could just bring that conversation wherever it makes sense to go.
Sounds good. Well, Andy, thanks so much again. Friends, God bless you. Hope everything is going well. Please pray for us and know that we are praying for you as well. Bye.